Today, I interview a predator.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. My name is Matt and I am your host. This is the show where we learn how to become better game masters and better role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Hopefully I didn't scare you with today's hook for this episode. My guest is a filmmaker, actor, and special effects artist, and he was in Predator 2. So you want to stick around for this interview. My guest today is filmmaker, actor, and special effects artist, Wyatt Weed. Wyatt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me.
How did you begin working in the film industry?
Wow, going way back. I'm a Star Wars kid. Like, I was 13 years old when Star Wars came out, so that sort of lit the fuse and started the fire burning. And you know, when I was 14, I got a Super 8mm camera and started making movies in the garage. You know, the classic thing, hanging spaceships on wires and blowing them up with firecrackers. But then in the 1980s, I wanted to get into it professionally, but all there really was available to me in the Midwest, like the St. Louis area, was cable television. So I volunteered in cable television and I did a lot of video stuff, but I really wanted to work on big Hollywood films. So in 1988, I took like $500 and my old beat up 1976 Grand Prix, and I left and I went to Los Angeles, and I called every friend I ever had and looked up every contact I ever had and started working in the movies. And I started as a production assistant and then started working my way up from there into the acting and the special effects and everything else. So really it was just me knocking on doors and, you know, walking around LA and, you know, asking for a job, like old school, man, before there was internet or anything.
What was one of your first jobs that you remember when you got out there?
Oh God. I had been in Los Angeles for about 8 days, and I was staying with a friend who was going to CalArts, which is the big filmmaking school out there. So I'm crashed in his dorm room, and I called this guy I'd met at a science fiction convention, and he said, "Are you in town?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you need a job?" And I said, "Yeah, that's why I'm calling." And so I'd been there 8 days, and I started working on this horrible low-budget movie called The Laughing Dead. And I was a production assistant. I helped with makeup. I helped with special effects. I did everything. And I ended up getting to play a zombie for a very brief scene in the movie. And then I started doing music videos. Like music videos, they were big then, and everybody was doing a music video. So like every weekend you could work on a music video because, you know, to keep the budget down, companies will rent stuff on Friday. They'll shoot all night Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then they'll return the gear on Monday. So it's a one-day rental, but they just shoot as much stuff as they can. So I worked on all these music videos. But then after I'd been there about 6 or 8 months, I got a job on another horrible film called Dead Men Don't Die. And if you can find a copy of this movie and watch it, Dead Men Don't Die, you're a trooper. But it actually had Elliot Gould in it. It had Elliot Gould and Mabel King and a guy named Mark Patton, who went on to be like the villain in Desperate Housewives. So it had this great cast. It had Melissa Sue Anderson from Little House on the Prairie. So I was working with all these great, awesome people on just like the worst zombie comedy movie you've ever seen in your life. But then about a year or two into it, things started to get better. Like I got a job on, oh my gosh, Flight of the Intruder, which was a Vietnam War film by John Milius, and it starred like Willem Dafoe, and Danny Glover, you know, really cool stuff like that. And so the film started getting better after that. You know, it was, you have to pay your dues, man. You got to learn what you're doing on the low budget, rotten films. But then the film started getting better. And then I started doing a lot of TV work, started doing a lot of TV acting. I really started working in a lot of different things. I spread myself a little thin. If I had it to do over again, I probably would have concentrated on just filmmaking, but I was acting, I was doing special effects, I was running around doing everything. I loved it all, so I did it all.
No, that's great. I guess you haven't made it until you played a zombie at least once, right?
Oh man, I don't know if you've ever heard the story. When Jenna Fisher and James Gunn, they're divorced now, unfortunately, but when they were a married couple, her like whole goal in life was to play a zombie, and he took her out to dinner. He was getting ready to do, what was the horrible movie with horrible as in scary, like where the creatures got inside people and made them incredibly hungry. Nathan Fillion and
Slither.
Slither, yes. So James Gunn's getting ready to do Slither, and he takes Jenna out to dinner, and it's like this big romantic dinner, and it's almost like a proposal, but instead he presents her with, I want you to play a zombie in my movie, and she was thrilled. She was absolutely head over heels excited. But yeah, playing a zombie is kind of a rite of passage, I think. You're not an actor until you've played a zombie.
I'm kind of glad to hear that, you started off saying that you were a fan of Star Wars and things. Sometimes you hear about people working on some incredible movies and then you find out that they don't like science fiction or fantasy. But that is not your case.
No, not at all. And I think, it behooves any actor or filmmaker to do the research. Even if you're not a fan of something, I admire people like, there were people who worked on the 2009 Star Trek reboot with the J.J. Abrams version. And I think J.J. was even one of the people who, it's like he kind of knew Star Trek, but he didn't know it super well. So the first thing he did was like sit down and watch the entire original series so he could get a sense of it. And I hear about actors who, they're going to be in a Shakespeare-based film and they know nothing of Shakespeare. So they go and they pick out a bunch of Shakespeare's plays and they read all that stuff. And I try to do, even though I love the horror and the science fiction and the fantasy, if I'm going to do something else like a standard drama or even within the genre, I didn't get the part, but a couple of months ago, I got asked to audition for a fan film, and I was asked to read for the part of the Black Mask, Roman Sionis. So DC fans will know who this is. So I'm going to play Roman Sionis, who is going to go on to become the Black Mask in this fan film. And I didn't know the character, and I didn't know the Black Mask, or how Roman Sionis became the Black Mask. So I went and read the comics, and I went and did the research, so that when I was doing the audition, I knew what the heck I was doing in the audition. So yeah, any actor who says, I don't know what's going on, they just haven't done their research. And I think that's lazy. And if you don't like something, a paycheck is a paycheck, but if you don't like something, I don't know why you do it. I don't know if you've ever heard the stories about Sean Connery, and Sean Connery had all these like near misses with all this stuff. Like he was asked to play like, I can't remember the name of the character that Lawrence Fishburne played in The Matrix.
Morpheus.
I think they asked Sean Connery to like be Morpheus, and he said no because he didn't understand it. He didn't get it. And then they asked him to play like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings or something, and he said no because he didn't understand it. Yeah. So then when they came to him with, I'm drawing a blank. It's the one where all the old superheroes of literature joined together, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Yeah. They asked him to be in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and he said he didn't understand it, but he'd said no to so many big things that he felt like he had to say yes to League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and then he hated it. So that's just for whatever that's worth.
I was going to ask you, because you worked on a show that was like kind of pivotal to my childhood, and it came on when I was 13. So Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Oh yes.
What did you do on Star Trek: The Next Generation?
I had a small, what they call featured bit. I wasn't an extra. I was more featured than that. I didn't have any speaking lines, but when you see the episode, it was a 3rd season episode called The High Ground. And I play a guard, a Rutian bodyguard on this planet that they've gone to. And there's a character named Alexana, and Alexana is the police commander on the planet, the police forces. And I'm one of her two bodyguards. And pretty much every scene Alexana is in, I'm in with her being her bodyguard. And as maybe inglorious as that may sound, if you watch the episode, I'm very well featured. I get to partake in all of the action. I get to have scenes with some of the main characters. And again, even though I don't say anything, it was a lot of fun. I got featured on screen a lot. And I spent like 3 days. I spent a couple of days, and there was a day of casting where they talked to you to see if you were right. And then there was a day of wardrobe fitting. And then there were like 3 days on set. So they shoot the episodes, I think, for like 5 to 8 days, depending on the episode. But I was on set for like 3 days. And so that was, if you can imagine, that was 3 days on set with Jonathan Frakes, with Patrick Stewart, with Michael Dorn. It just was an amazing experience, because by that point in time, this was like late 1989. I'd been in Los Angeles for a year. I'd been on a lot of sets by then. I'd done a lot of extra work and a couple of small acting roles in non-union films. So I knew what I was doing on set as an actor, and I considered myself a professional. But to walk onto set and the first person who says hello to you is Commander Riker, and he welcomes you aboard the Enterprise. And you're standing there chatting with Commander Riker, and you hear that voice coming. You hear Patrick Stewart coming from a distance because that voice is so distinctive. And you're not ready. As professional as you think you are, you turn and you're face to face with Patrick Stewart, and you get introduced to him, and he's talking to you. And then Michael Dorn walks up in full Worf makeup, and you're in on their life. They're chatting and they're talking about what they did over the weekend, and they're talking about the convention that they went to, and what a fan said to them, and what their children are doing. And I was just, like I said, as professional as I felt like I was, it took all I had to just not like scream and jump up and down and go, "Oh my God, I'm on Star Trek. Oh my God." So it was very fun, and it was a very amazing experience, because what I've learned in situations like this, and in most situations, is I watch and I pay attention. So to see these people work, to see them concentrate, to see them learn their lines, to see how professional and prepared they are. And nothing prepares you for how fast television moves. Even though it was long days on Star Trek, for whatever reason, those guys shoot for long, long hours. But for whatever reason, they still move very, very fast. And so just that experience and watching them and taking it all in and seeing the interaction between them, it just was an amazing experience. But I have to tell you, when I got the call from the casting woman who said, "Hey, they want to see you on Star Trek Next Generation," I knew right then and there, even if I was an extra, even if I was in the background, I thought, I am going to be on TV for the rest of my life, because I knew Star Trek The Next Generation would be in syndication forever. I knew I would be like an old man sitting in my chair, and that episode of Star Trek would come on, and I'd be like, "Yeah, that's the episode of Star Trek that I was on." and again, the like, how there'd be the opening stinger, the opening dramatic thing that would incite the episode, and then it would go into the opening credits. The last shot before they go to the opening credits on that episode is me and two other people with our phasers drawn, standing there in camera, in a medium shot. And it was the biggest rush and the most fun to do that. It was just, it was everything you could hope it would be. And then over the years, I bumped into Jonathan Frakes for some reason, like a half a dozen times. And he probably doesn't actually know my name, but I swear he remembers me. And it was weird. It was like we bumped into each other on the street, and I said hi, and I reminded him where I was from. And then we bumped into each other a couple of times at these showbiz expos that they'd have in Los Angeles, where they show off all the new camera equipment and all the new technical stuff. And I'd bump into him there because he was starting to direct stuff, and I was trying to do directing stuff. And then I bumped into him at Comic-Con, and he had just directed one of the Librarian films that featured vampires, and I had just directed my first film, which was a vampire film. So we got to talk about vampire films. So just good people all around, and just a really great experience. I have no bad review of the whole Star Trek The Next Generation experience. That was just a fantastic thing. It was kind of all downhill from there.
Well, I hope not, but that would have been a high point for me too. I think I would have melted down or something. I would have just stood there and not said anything if I was next to some of those people. But I mean, just to kind of continue with Star Trek a little bit, what do you think about Star Trek Picard coming on?
You know what? I'm looking much more forward to Star Trek Picard than I am the whole Discovery thing for me. Star Trek Discovery has not worked for me. And I hear a lot of fans defend it, and I hear a lot of fans say, okay, it's a different Star Trek, be open-minded, be this, be that. But it's a Star Trek that I think very much exists. It's a product of what we're seeing in the modern day. It's a product of cliffhangers. It's a product of serialization. It's a product of, this sort of Lost mentality where, let's set up a mystery and let's get you to hang on for the mystery, and then let's just keep extending the mystery as long as we can. And to me, that's not what Star Trek is. Maybe it is technically Star Trek. It's just not Star Trek that I have enjoyed. And so Picard, because I think it's a little more, no pun intended, it's down to earth. It's about him. It's about one man. Clearly, there's going to be an adventure or some intrigue that he gets involved in. And they're dealing with it, they're dealing with the fact that years have gone by. He's an older guy. He's been on Earth for a while. And somehow he gets sucked back into all of this. And it looks much more intriguing. I'm much more interested. I have had a really hard time with Discovery, but I'm going to give Picard a chance. I'm going to check it out and see what it's about.
Just a few weeks ago, you were at a convention, and I noticed you were giving a panel on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Sadly, I wasn't able to attend because I was doing another panel just like right after that. But so I take it you're a fan of the original series as well.
For me, the original series it's formative, and I don't mean to sound like too much of a Star Trek whack job, but I'm
fine with that.
Well, I don't remember the original. Probably the first two seasons are hazy to me. I was born in 1964. Star Trek started in 1966. I remember the final season, though. I remember the third season when it went off the air in 1969. So some of my earliest memories are literally of Star Trek. Like I can remember Mr. Spock with his blue shirt and his pointed ears on television, on the big, huge tube television in the living room, and sitting in front of the living room and watching Mr. Spock. And then being 5 years old, Star Trek went into syndication almost immediately after it went off the air. So by fall of 1969, I was coming home after school, and every day after school, Star Trek was on at 3:30. I got out of school at 3 o'clock, and I came home and I watched Star Trek. So not only was it an amazing and incredibly well done show, but imagine, being exposed to those kinds of characters at that age. So people might look at someone like Captain Kirk now and think, what a chauvinistic or misogynistic character. I saw Captain Kirk as, my God, what a role model. He was the smartest guy in the room. He was a leader. He took action. He was clever. He had a very crafty mind. I mean, the guy defeated a Greek god. He outsmarted the ultimate computer. Captain Kirk, he was just my idol. Captain Kirk was just this amazing figure to follow. And then you had that amazing, threesome, that trilogy that people have written about and, written doctorates about. And that is, that whole Kirk, Spock, McCoy, ego, superego, and id thing going on with all these different sides of a personality being featured. It was incredibly influential on me dramatically too. Just the music, the camera angles, the camera movement. So much of what I do today dramatically is probably inspired by Star Trek and the way they would shoot those shows, the way the music would swell, the action. It was just a gigantic influence. So then to be 15 years old, to be an aspiring filmmaker And then Star Trek: The Motion Picture comes out. So, Star Trek has been off the TV. It's been canceled for 10 years, and here comes this motion picture. And to set the stage, back in the day, back in 1979, again, no internet, no multiple trailers dropping, no, fans taking pictures secretly on set and uploading them to the internet. All you got was what you were given by like Starlog magazine and maybe, Rona Barrett once or twice on network news. So when the movie hit, you knew virtually nothing. Now, I have problems with the movie. The movie is essentially just a big budget version of a couple of the episodes of the television series reworked, but it was back, and it was back on the big screen, and it was this tremendous, huge thing in my life. But over the years then, as I've become a filmmaker and I've studied this movie and studied the special effects and studied the history of the film, there's this incredibly complicated history to how the film got made. And it very nearly didn't get finished. I mean, you've probably heard some of the horror stories about the film, but they started working on possibly a new TV movie or new theatrical movie or a series of TV movies back like in 1972 or 1973. Once Paramount realized, oh, well, clearly Star Trek the series isn't dead. It's still popular. It's growing in popularity. The fans are starting to have conventions. This property is not dead. Let's do something with it. But they just went back and forth for years about what the heck they were going to do. And then, of course, Star Wars came out in 1977, and every studio had to do some kind of big theatrical science fiction film. So they abandoned all their plans for a new TV series or TV movies, and they said, let's make Star Trek the Motion Picture. Well, and I'm sorry, this is a lengthy answer, but you've struck a passion point here. Back then, there was something called blind bidding. And blind bidding was the process of, if you wanted a big studio film, you had to promise to play it like for a number of weeks in a number of theaters, and you had to pay the studio in advance basically to get the rights to play the film. Well, Paramount had already accepted like $35 million in advance payments to play this film, and they were like 9 months from releasing the movie, and basically the guys in charge of the special effects had screwed up. They weren't getting the special effects done. The special effects weren't happening. It wasn't going to happen. And Paramount basically got threatened with a class action lawsuit if they didn't have Star Trek the Motion Picture ready to be released by December 7th of 1979. And they basically dropped the hammer and said, okay, we don't care what it takes. We don't care how much money it takes. We don't care if the movie makes sense. We got to finish this movie in 9 months, and we got to release it. So they made this incredible deal with Douglas Trumbull and John Dykstra, who had done the special effects for Close Encounters and Star Wars, to come in and finish the movie. And they did it. And depending on the accounts, the movie was finished roughly 4 or 5 days before the premiere. So Robert Weiss, the director, literally flew to the premiere with the film cans with him on the plane. And this is the part of it this is what I've been piecing together over the 40 years since Star Trek was released. I remember way back when it sounded like a joke. They said, Star Trek, the motion picture, the schedule was so tight, some of those prints went into the theaters still wet. Ha, 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 that sounds like a joke. I remember now that the print I saw in Springfield, Illinois on opening night, Champaign-Urbana opening night, the opening sequence of the movie had water spots all over it. So they're not kidding. Like, prints of that movie went into theaters still wet, and we had one in our theaters. So, and as the internet grows and as stories get published and as more and more things come out, I'm just fascinated. Like, you think there are problems with Star Trek the Motion Picture, and then you hear all the stories and you go, oh my God, I can't believe it was as coherent and successful as it was. Because when you hear the stories, you just cannot fathom how they got the thing done in time. So yeah, it's been an obsession that I've just been studying and accruing information on for years. So
have you ever looked into like the Space 1999 kind of connections?
Well, I know that one of the producers it kind of depends. Was it Fred Freeberg who was like on like the third season of Star Trek? And then when they retooled Space 1999 going into its second season, they brought Fred Freeberg or Freeberger over to retool the show. And some people think Fred Freeberger, has, he's a great producer, and other people think he's, sort of the death touch where, you bring Fred Freeberger in to kill a show. I knew about the producer connection, but I wasn't sure if, is there more than that?
Yeah, there is. There was a DVD release. I watched it, it was a number of years ago now, of Space 1999. The uniforms, especially from the first season to Star Trek The Motion Picture, are almost the same. There is also, I can't remember which season it was in. It might have been in the first season of Space in 1999. There is an episode where a sentient robot takes over a female crew member who then is a recording device and like that is there like observing and recording things. And then of course, I think it's the second season, but I mean, that was all for the motion picture. But then there's a tagline of one of the enemies then is resistance is futile. They use that in the second season. So that even carried over, I think, from Maurice Hurley, perhaps, into Next Gen. But, yeah, there were quite a number of connections, and they think because Gene Roddenberry was watching Space 1999 and that he loved it, and a lot of things that came over from that.
That makes sense. That actually makes a lot of sense.
You were a model maker, is that correct?
Yes. I was when you're a model maker, I mean, the term is model maker, yes, and that covers a broad spectrum of things. That can be something as basic and simple as, building a miniature spacecraft, like in Star Trek or Star Wars, building a spacecraft. It can also be things like, okay, we have this big expensive truck that we've built for a film that's the hero vehicle, but we don't want to blow it up, so let's build a miniature of the vehicle. For some reason, I've ended up 2 or 3 times building old-fashioned sailing ships, like clipper ships, like 3-masted clipper ships, because people needed to see like wrecked clipper ships, like on the rocks, like they washed ashore kind of thing. So of course, it's a lot easier to build, a 6 or 8 foot long clipper ship and then wreck it on a miniature shoreline than it is to do that in real life. And things like, miniature people, miniature puppets, where, up to a point, it's the actual actor, and then maybe there's a reverse and you see an actor in the frame with a large creature or a monster or a puppet of some kind. So there's a lot of different areas. You're doing technical stuff like the spaceships. You're doing more organic things like puppets and landscapes. And you can do stuff that stands on its own, like the entire shot is a model. Or you can do stuff that interacts with other things. I'm a big fan of hanging miniatures and forced perspectives. So you hang something in the foreground closer to camera that blends in with the background. There was an episode of Tales from the Crypt where they wanted to establish a train station. So if you can imagine like an aerial view looking down on a train station with trains and the boarding ramps and all of that. Well, they didn't have the money for that. So we basically built miniature train cars and hung them on boards in front of the camera, like 20 feet up on a scaffold, shot through a hole to the actors down below on the stage floor, walking across the stage floor. And it looked like 2 actors walking between 2 train cars, saying goodbye before one of them climbed on the train car. And when he climbed on the train car, it looked like he stepped up and disappeared into the train car. He stepped up on a couple of wooden boxes and just stood there because he passed behind the miniature at that point. So it looked like he walked up into the train car. So I like to do stuff like that that's in camera. I do admit that with, I think computers, I think CGI gets overused, but I'm a big fan of the compositing tools. Like back in the days of blue screen, optical printing and compositing and all of that, that was expensive. It was difficult to do. Not everyone could afford it. But now with the computers and being able to layer things almost infinitely, and the computer's ability to extract colors, it's so easy to shoot blue screen or green screen. Any amateur can do it now. But given all that, power with the computer, I still love to go back to practical stuff whenever possible. I love to go back to practicals and miniatures. So the miniature stuff sometimes crossed over with makeup effects, because sometimes, like on the Guyver movies, I worked on the Guyver and Guyver Dark Hero, which are live action adaptations of a Japanese anime hero. And there'd be scenes with like miniature creatures, and the creatures were puppeteered and partly mechanical, and they were made out of foam latex. So they were considered more makeup effects, but they were still miniatures. And then you'd have, a miniature Guyver puppet, a foot tall, who was a miniature humanoid, but still, needed to be cast in foam and painted like a latex makeup effect. So there were crossovers like that and things like that. And then occasionally you need to work with the effects guys. So here's a good segue. Predator, these makeup effects guys would make the Predator, but then when he's taking his mask off, he's got little air hoses, and he would have to pull the air hoses, and you'd see the gas shoot out of the air hoses. So you'd cross over between the makeup effects people to the effects people. So miniatures kind of was this world that opened up into a lot of different things, mechanics, special effects, rigging, engineering. It was really fascinating. And a lot of times you'd be given very little information, and you had to extrapolate that and create blueprints from photographs and bad photographs. And then you'd make these blueprints and duplicate something in miniature. And so it was a lot of fun. We got to do a lot of, it was always challenging, but it, as opposed to, with all due respect to CGI, a lot of these guys are sitting at workstations pushing buttons, and a lot of them go out into the field and they try to figure out what looks real and what doesn't, and what makes something look real, but they know how to program and they know how to do CGI. In the physical effects days, you were a sculptor, you were an architect, you were, a painter, you had to be part cinematographer, you had to be and when you're puppeteering things, you're an actor. It was so all encompassing that it was really, really an amazing field to be in. It was really gratifying to work on that stuff.
Now, you mentioned Predator. Weren't you in Predator 2?
In Predator 2, in the big end scene where you think there's only one Predator, and then that Predator's dead, and you think Danny Glover has won, and then all of a sudden like 10 Predators decloak and surround him, and he realizes he's not alone. And I was one of those 10 Predators. And what's fascinating about that is I got the gig because of this great stuntman named Brian Simpson. And Brian Simpson worked on the first Predator film. And after the Jean-Claude Van Damme days and the original failed first Predator, and then they went back and redesigned it, and Stan Winston and people created the Predator that we've come to know and love. Mm-hmm. Brian Simpson, something a lot of people don't know, when the Predator wasn't on screen with another person, it didn't have to be Kevin Peter Hall. Kevin Peter Hall was like the 7'2" guy who played the hero Predator in a lot of the shots. But when it was like a Predator leaping through the treetops or falling off a cliff or something, that was Brian, who's my size, who's 6'1", in a Predator suit that was sculpted for him. So rather than, risk injuring their 7'2" hero actor, they'd put a professional stuntman in a slightly smaller suit and do the stunts with him. Then when, you saw the Predator on screen with Arnold, then it was Kevin Peter Hall in his hero suit. Well, when they got ready to do that end scene on Predator 2, Brian Simpson was slated to be this particular Predator. It was a variation of a Predator made from his suit on the first film. They just modified it and created a different look for it. But because it was supposed to be him in the suit, they used the suit from the first film. Well, Brian had to go and do something else. He was working on a different scene that day, and they needed him to be there supervising stunts on that, but they needed somebody to fill that suit. Well, Brian and I had worked on a film together before. He knew I could do the work. We were the same size. So he's like, hey, get this Wyatt Weed guy, get him to be in the suit. He can do it. So I got a call on like a Monday night to be a Predator. And like Tuesday morning, I'm in the Predator suit on set for the end scene of the movie. And it was, again, a great experience, very fast moving. People always ask me what Danny Glover was like. We didn't have a chance to talk to Danny Glover. We were shooting so fast, moving so quickly, getting so many shots done. Everybody was very professional and very friendly. It's just we were moving so fast, there was no real time to socialize. So we shoot this film. Predator 2 comes and goes. It's not nearly as big a hit as the first film. It's reasonably successful, but that first film was such a phenomenon, and the second film really was not. The second film just kind of came and went. And we thought, oh, this is going to make us famous. It's going to put us on the map. We're all going to work after this. And it just kind of came and went. And it was like, oh, well, that happened, and moving on. Again, this was pre-internet. So years go by and they kind of reboot the Predator series. They do Alien versus Predator. The films start getting popular again. The internet starts happening, and fans start, you can get the films on DVD now. You can stream them. You can download stuff. You can do screen caps. You can talk to fans all across the world. Well, the fan community started this buzz about Predator 2, and it turns out that a lot of them had discovered Predator 2 and they loved Predator 2. And the fans built this community, the Lost Predator Tribe. And in the film, we didn't have names. We were just, hey, you, come over here. I mean, we were just guys in Predator suits. Well, the fans created names and characters for all of us and gave us backstories and called us the Lost Tribe and did all this crazy stuff. So over the years then, I knew people at conventions who started saying, hey, you were a Predator in Predator 2. Would you come to this convention? I'm like, really? Are you sure? They're like, dude, there's a guy over there who was a Hare Krishna zombie for 30 seconds 30 years ago in Dawn of the Dead, and he's getting $25 a pop to sign an autograph. Dude, you were a Predator. You need to come and hang out at my convention. So I started doing the conventions kind of as a lark, and it started to catch on, and it started to get popular. And the thing that was probably the coolest, here's another one of those, geeky moments. At one point in time, I got contacted by a sculptor, and he said he was working on an action figure that was based on my Predator from Predator 2. And he said, do you have any photos? And I said, you know what? We weren't supposed to have cameras on set, but I took a camera that day and I got like 2 really good photos of myself. I will send you the photos that I have. And he's like, awesome, great. I'll get you a figure someday if they ever make these. Well, he never did. And like 2 years went by, and I'm at a convention, and this friend of mine runs up and he goes, dude, your Predator figure is over there. Now, I've heard this 100 times. People see Predator and they think, oh, that's you. But there are so many different Predators. There was the original Jungle Predator. There was the City Hunter. There's the Elder Predator. There's Gray. There's the Pred Alien. There's this. There's that. There's a million different Predators. And I was like, it's not me. And he goes, no, dude, this is you. This is your Predator. And I was like, okay, show me. So he takes me over to this booth and he shows me what is now called the Boar Predator, because that's what the fans have decided. He shows me the Boar Predator action figure by this company called NECA. And I was dumbfounded. And then I remembered that sculptor who'd called me a few years earlier and asked me to send him photos. And I realized this was what he was working on. So, to see yourself as an actual action figure, that ranks right up there with Star Trek, man. It's like, okay, I'm on Star Trek and I have an action figure. Here, you can play with me. Here's my action figure. That's just, I'm going to keep working and I'm going to keep doing stuff, but, I can die a pretty happy guy because I've done Star Trek and I'm an action figure. So, I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty thrilled with things at this point. So, but yeah, the Predator thing it's only grown. And the number of people who walk up and talk about how much they love Predator 2 is really astonishing to me. It's amazing how many fans there are. I mean, I know Predator is a big deal, but people really seem to love Predator 2. And I think that film was a little bit ahead of its time because it was sort of dealing with crime in the inner cities and drug lords. And it was also dealing with global warming, because the reason the Predator was here was because it was so warm and it was really hot in the city. And so they were kind of talking about some things that maybe people weren't really aware of at the time. I still think the first film is the best one. But yeah, there's a lot of people who come up to me at shows and are like, Predator 2 was my favorite Predator, guy. And I'm like, okay, awesome. Good to hear. You know?
Oh, that's something else. Now, I think you had mentioned it just a little bit. You have directed at least one or more feature films, right?
Yes. I like to call myself, my first feature film was a film called Shadowland, and we actually shot it in 2007, and it was actually officially released in 2010. And it's currently available. It's probably streaming on Amazon and various.
Yeah, it's on Amazon Prime. Yeah.
And basically, you know, everything I was doing in Hollywood was leading towards directing. Like, yes, I loved acting, but I wanted that to lead to directing. And I loved miniatures and I love special effects, but I wanted that to all lead to directing. Well, you know, I'm approaching 40 years old, and, you know, if you haven't been hired as a director in Los Angeles by a major studio by the time you're in your 40s, they're probably not going to hire you. And, you know, so I'm trying to get movies off the ground. And I was a second unit director a couple times and done some producing and writing, but I'd never directed anything. And I had a chance with a friend based in the St. Louis area, and he had come into financing and he wanted to develop a company. And this is Robert Clark. And Robert Clark wanted to start this company, Pirate Pictures. And he'd already made a feature film in Los Angeles with my friend Ted Smith called Guardian of the Realm. And he loved making films and he wanted to do more of it, but he didn't want to do it in LA. So he said, would you be interested in coming back to St. Louis? And I was ready to get out of LA at that point. But I also realized with digital technology, I'd seen the digital technology get so good at that point that I knew I didn't have to be in LA to make a nice looking film anymore. So I moved back to St. Louis. We started Pirate Pictures, and I got to do this vampire film, Shadowland, which was my first feature. And that was a great experience. I jokingly referred to myself as the most prepared first-time director ever, because I'd done everything and I'd been trying to get this done for so long. I mean, I was a producer, I was a writer, I was an actor, I was a second unit director. I'd done stunts and special effects and miniatures. And I was like, just give me a feature film, man. I'm ready. It's like, I'm ready to do this. So Shadowland was a great experience. That worked out really well. And then we followed that up a few years later with a film called Four Color Eulogy. And Four Color Eulogy is really just kind of a dramedy. It's kind of a comedy drama. But it's about these fanboys, really, who really want to be comic book artists and writers. But it kind of deals with their life and the difficulty of like making your dream become a reality. And in the meantime, there's family drama and things going on. So Shadowland is this sprawling, time-spanning vampire film. And then Four Color Eulogy is this tiny little comedy drama about fanboys and geeks. So they're two very different films. We've been for the last year or two trying to get this Western off the ground called Retribution. And a friend, actor, director, friend of mine named Jason Contini, who is he's the lead. Actually, he's one of the leads in Shadowland, and he's the lead in Four Color Eulogy. Jason wants to direct this Western called Retribution, and we've been trying to get the funding off the ground, and we've gotten close a couple of times, and we had some interest from DirecTV, and we've talked to some big name actors, and these things are just tough. When you're trying to raise, $500,000 or $1 million, it's just, people don't realize how long it takes to pull that kind of money together to make these films. So Retribution is this ongoing project. I did The Dark Knight Returns, which was the fan film that was really successful. But I've got 2 or 3 feature films in development right now, just within the Pirate Pictures company. That's our company. And I'm going to do one of them next year. I know that. And I don't know if it's going to be a small horror film, if it's going to be a bigger drama. But damn it, I'm going to do one of these films next spring. And we're incredibly busy. We do production all the time. We do production for hire. We do corporate stuff. We do commercial stuff. And we've been doing all this developing and all this test shooting and stuff. But the public hasn't seen much out of us for like the last 18 months. So that's why next year regardless what's happening, I'm going to stop for like 2 months in the spring, and I'm going to do a feature. And I think it's going to be this small horror film that I want to do, which I haven't talked to a lot of people about yet, but I've got this idea for a horror film, and I just want to do it. I just want to do it and get it done and have some fun, scare some people.
It's just, it's just interesting to me to hear you talk about this because, when I went to school, I studied film, and I tried to be a screenwriter and a director for a while, up until about 9 years ago, and then I kind of gave it up. But so it's interesting to hear you talk about some of this, and it's just really fascinating. Where online can people find some more information about you?
I have a personal website that's just wyattweed.com, and it's kind of got my bio and history and lists of some of my projects, resumes. I think there's a link to The Dark Knight on there. And then, of course, my Facebook page, I'm Wyatt Weed on Facebook, and that leads to other things like, the Dark Knight Returns, an epic fan film Facebook page. And my wife has a Facebook page called So I Married a Predator. And and she posts on there some of the crazy things we do, but she also posts convention information. She's really good about keeping the public informed, like where I'm going to be next, what I'm going to be doing, where I'm going to be appearing. I probably do like 6 or 8 shows a year, which are either comic book shows or small one-day conventions, or I've been doing more 2 and 3 day weekend long conventions, and I've been doing them sort of across the Midwest. I haven't really tried to go into the big shows yet, like San Diego Comic-Con or New York Comic-Con, but I've been doing them across the Midwestern area, and we do usually about 6 or 8 shows a year across the year. So she's really good about that on her So I Married a Predator page. But I keep people pretty well informed on my Facebook page, and then, of course, like I said, wyattweed.com has a lot of stuff. I also have a YouTube channel. I'm Wyatt Weed on YouTube, and that is where all my films are at, some of the short films I've worked on. And I try to post updates occasionally about what I'm doing, what I'm working on, what the next project is. Jason Contini and I just shot a promo, an update this past weekend telling everybody where Retribution is at. And we're going to actually show the Retribution trailer, which we've never shown before. So I'll be posting about that on YouTube and on my Facebook page. So, but yeah, Facebook is a great way to track me down and see what I'm doing.
Okay, well, I'll make sure that in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com, I will link all of those websites up. And now I would be, I guess, a little remiss if I didn't ask you, have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons?
I played Dungeons and Dragons. I want to say it was like a fall and winter, and I'm talking way back. I'm talking it would have been about 1978 into 1979, maybe. Probably back when it was really in its first sort of uprising. As it was really first sort of catching on in popularity. And all my friends in junior high school were playing Dungeons and Dragons. So it was a lot of fun for that season that I played it. And then I want to say like 1989, 1990, when I hooked up with a group of friends in Los Angeles, we had a brief flirtation with, it was called Melee. And it was almost like Dungeons and Dragons Light. It seems like the campaigns were a little faster and you could move through it a little easier, but we did Melee for a while, and I always found it a lot of fun. I think for me, my brain always goes a step further. Like most of my friends were happy playing the board game or playing the role-playing tabletop game. I then always wanted to go, well, this is incredibly visual and this is incredibly exciting. Let's make a film out of this. Or I could always visualize it. And it's like I could only play for so long before, no, I want to get up and go build a dragon and make a sword and do a fight scene. And so I don't know that I ever had. It's funny because I'm a very patient person. I can sculpt and build models and do all these intricate things, but I don't know if I'm patient enough to play really lengthy board game or tabletop game campaigns, but I have played it. I do like it. I love talking to people about the concepts. I have a friend who plays Warhammer, and I love talking to him about Warhammer. I love talking to my friends who play the big online, mass role-playing games. I'm fascinated in the worlds. I'm fascinated in the world building, the history behind these things. This isn't the tabletop role-playing, but I loved watching my friends play some of the early computer games where you'd play through part of the game and you'd reach a level and then you'd see a cut live action scene and then you'd play through again and you'd see another, like Wing Commander. The early versions of Wing Commander had these live action scenes featuring Mark Hamill. Mm-hmm. And so it was really entertaining to sit and watch my friend play. And so it was almost like watching a movie. So I'm fascinated in the world building and the thought process. I'm more interested in like Gary Gygax and all the books and all the history and all the world building. About a year and a half ago, I do a lot of work with Lindbergh High School here in St. Louis. I help the actors with their acting for camera class. I come and speak to the students once or twice a year. But a few years ago, they did a play in their theater department called She Kills Monsters. And She Kills Monsters is basically a story about a young girl who has died, and her older sister sort of discovers her notebooks and discovers her layout for this board game that she's created. And she plays the game with some of her local friends to sort of learn more about her dead sister. And basically it's like what's going on in real life in the play is mirrored by what's happening in the game that they're playing. So they had me help them build all these creatures. And it must have been in association with D&D, because there was a 5-headed dragon called a Tiamat, and there was a big floating one-eyed character, and there were all these things that were clearly, there was the gelatinous cube.
Yeah.
There was the gelatinous cube was in the play. So it was fun to immerse myself. This for me was ideal. I was immersing myself in making these characters 3-dimensional and real. So that for me was like the perfect crossover with D&D, where I got to immerse myself in the game, but make actual suits and costumes and puppets and stuff out of D&D characters. That was my dream. You guys, I think I'd rather help build the live action D&D now than play the D&D. But no, D&D has, that's just part of my upbringing and part of my friends when I was in high school. And, I've got some fond memories of those times, and back when things were simpler and easier, and, life was just, a roll of the dice back then.
I could probably talk to you here all day and probably just ask you more questions about Star Trek and Star Trek the Motion Picture, but I should let you go. So it is just an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Wyatt. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. I wanted to say very quickly that we haven't touched much on The Dark Knight Returns, and that's fine. But what I did want to say, if there are any fans out there going, when's he going to make more Dark Knight Returns? I'm working on it. I'm trying. It's difficult. Fan films, you can't make money on fan films, so you don't want to spend a lot of money. So trying to create something from nothing and get everybody to help for free is incredibly time consuming. And so I am working on more, and I wish I could tell you when it was going to happen. I just don't know, but please be patient and keep checking back. And one day I will have an announcement saying more Dark Knight. So hang in there.
Okay. So that is your fan film adaptation of Frank Miller's kind of famous or infamous graphic novel, correct?
It's what I did was I did about a 45-minute long film that was based on really the first issue of The Dark Knight Returns. I sort of adapted the first chunk of The Dark Knight Returns. And in my head, that's what I always wanted to do. All my life, well, ever since I read The Dark Knight Returns, that was the part that I really wanted to do as a short film. Well, the reaction was so good, and I had such a fun time doing it that I really want to continue it. It's a massive undertaking. It's just a massive undertaking. And, I'm getting older, and I am now the age that Bruce Wayne was in The Dark Knight Returns. And I got to tell you, each day gets a little tougher and a little harder. And so making those films is just huge. But if people are patient, I would love to finish them out. I've been working on the scripts. I've been making props. I've been making costumes. I've been talking to actors and scouting locations. And so I am moving forward. It's just, I've been moving forward in bits, and I don't know exactly when the next one is going to start shooting and when it will be finished, but I am planning on doing it. I am absolutely planning on doing it.
All right. Well, I'll make sure to put a link to that in the show notes for this episode as well. So again, Wyatt, just thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, no problem. This is a lot of fun.
Well, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this interview with Wyatt today. I'm still just kind of geeking out over the fact that he was in Star Trek The Next Generation. If you want to learn more about Wyatt, I have provided links in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. Also, after the interview was over, I was chatting with Wyatt a little bit. He has done more work on Star Trek, so I may just have him on for a big kind of geek out session on Star Trek at a later date, because I love Star Trek. Now, if you want some free stuff, you can head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You will get 10 free dungeon maps and some RPG resources that you can use in your campaigns. You will also never miss an episode of this show. Now, guys, I know I say it at the end of the show every week, but your support on Patreon would just really help me know that you want me to continue this show. So if you could head over to patreon.com/dicegeeks and just even consider supporting the show financially, that would just be amazing. Every little bit of support that I receive goes into making this show better and better. So I thank you for listening, and until next time, keep gaming.